My name's Davida Shinsky, and I'm the host of Live Without Limits Dreams Come True with the Right Mindset. And today's presentation is titled Two Warning Signs of Covert Narcissism and 8 Helpful Ways to Deal with It. Not every narcissist is the loud, boisterous one in the room, vying for everyone's attention with their grandiose stories and accomplishments. Sometimes there are covert narcissists who fly under the radar, but they still have some exaggerated needs for admiration. Perhaps you wonder sometimes about someone in your life, or maybe an ex. Could they be covert narcissists? In this presentation, we'll help you understand what a covert narcissist is, as well as how to contend with one. What is a narcissist? Narcissism is a personality disorder known better as narcissistic personality disorder. Common traits of someone struggling with NPD include the need for exceptional amount of admiration, the need to feel incredibly important, consumed with fantasies about fame and boatloads of glory, grandiose boasting. If you've done it, they've done it too, and better. Feeling entitled, exploiting others, lacking compassion and empathy for others, obsessing about success, power, beauty, and whatever. What is covert narcissism? Covert means secret or under the radar, whereas someone diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder is considered to have covert characteristics. A covert narcissist has covert characteristics of narcissism. This means that the traits are more subtle and may not be as noticeable to others. However, there are 12 signs of covert narcissism, including the following. They'll love bomb you in the beginning of a relationship. Typically, one or both of you will feel an intense soulmate connection. They may boast about the intensity and act like they idolize you. They're great at wooing others, but over time, some narcissistic traits will begin to surface, such as selfishness, passive aggressiveness, emotional abuse, and more. They are intensive in your needs, or rather, they are insensitive to your needs. They'll subtly disregard your needs so that you will feel less important. They may procrastinate on getting back to you, stand you up, not value your time, be late, or something else to make you feel small. They confuse you. Conversations or arguments will likely cause you to feel confused. You'll be second guessing yourself, wondering if you're literally going crazy. Your perceptions may indeed be correct, but they will try to manipulate the conversation to allow them to come across as correct. They want to they want compliments much more of the time, and they will make sure that they're the center of attention. If they aren't getting compliments, they may minimize themselves so that others might reassure them of how amazing they are. You experience cognitive disso- disassociates. They say one thing but do another, which is confusing. They may tell you stories of how amazing they are, but you're not seeing it or seeing that side of them. You have gut feelings that something is off. They have a desire to win. It may not be that obvious, but it's there. They may also have a tough time apologizing or admitting that they're wrong. A covert narcissist will slyly try to shame or blame you. They may emotionally manipulate you so that you think something about you is at fault, while it was really their fault. They want you to feel less than. They are stingy, unless, of course, someone will praise them. A covert narcissist will likely only give when they know there is something in it for them. They're not emotionally available. A covert narcissist may seem like they're more available emotionally, but over time you'll find that they're not. There is too There are too consumed with trying to get their own needs for admiration met. They may stonewall you, which means they ignore and refuse to talk to you. Typically, it's because they're intentionally trying to manipulate or control you. They are passive aggressive. They may have a woe is me attitude. Excuse me. They may have a woe is me attitude, playing on your empathy. They can play the pity card. So every time you come around, they complain about how hard things are for them trying to get sympathy. Now, causes of covert narcissism. Whether we're talking about an overt or covert narcissist, mental health experts at the Cleveland Clinic report that the causes of such narcissism tend to be childhood trauma or abuse, genetics, toxic relationships with caregivers or anyone else, dysfunctional environment while growing up, temperament, fragile sense of self-worth. It's not exactly clear why someone will grow up to be a covertly or overtly narcissistic. It very well could be a combination of childhood family dynamics and life events. At the very core, there is a human being that is displaying narcissistic traits to cover up a very fragile sense of self worth. They fear being vulnerable, they're insecure and quite empty inside. Dealing with a covert narcissist. What to do? It can be challenging to deal with a covert narcissist, whether it's your partner, parent, friend, or relative. It's important to learn more about NPD as well as boundaries. Here are 8 helpful things that you can do to deal with a covert narcissist. Educate yourself on NPD and covert narcissism. This way, you empower yourself and can spot the covert traits. Have an honest conversation with the person if there's someone you can't avoid. They may not be receptive to what you have to say, but you can still be direct and honest with them. Call them out on the traits when they're using them. This gives them the opportunity to apologize or work on changing their behavior. Encourage them to see a counselor. They may or may not oblige, but you get to set the boundary with them. You can see a counselor as well, especially if you're struggling with being in a relationship with a covert narcissist. Set clear boundaries. Know what your boundaries are and don't apologize for having them. Try not to take it personally. Their behavior has more to do with them and their emotional wounds than it does with you. Know what you want and need. Then use your voice and express it. The covert narcissist may resist you, but you deserve to be seen and heard. By experiencing your voice, you'll know what your next step will be, and depending on how they react. Leave the relationship if it continues to be toxic or there are any kind of abuse going on. Reach out for help. It's not always easy to cut ties with a covert narcissist, especially if you're struggling with low self esteem or codependency. If you're in need of some support, seek out a therapist. You'll be able to learn more about narcissism, yourself, setting boundaries, and build courage to do whatever you need to do so you can feel free from a toxic relationship. You can also visit Narcissistic Abuse Support Organization. There, you can view resources that will help you learn how to better handle someone struggling with NPD and covert narcissism. Now, I know that many of you are saying or might think you know of someone who's narcissistic, but I can give you a perfect example. I grew up in a home that was very dysfunctional. And my mother was the most negative person in the world. And almost every other word out of her mouth was a discouragement, was a negative, and in many ways, she was very narcissistic because she was very abusive emotionally and verbally, and in many ways, it was all about her and her needs. And she really did not care about the people around her. You know, when you've got young children, you need to show them love. And when you have a child with a disability, they need to know that they're loved. In many ways, when I looked at my family and and I understood psychology, and I always somehow, even as a young child, felt very distant from them. And that was because I was always very introspective, and I was someone who always, let me back up, that if you told me I couldn't do anything, it was like putting a red flag in front of me and daring me to prove you wrong. Now, my mother did that because partly, and I'm sure a lot of it had to do with growing up in a home herself where her mother was very abusive and was very critical. And I saw all my aunts being exactly like my grandmother and repeating all those behaviors. I see it in my younger sister, that same attitude, and my older sister's death. And because they constantly told her she's helpless, she's worthless, or that she's poor, that she has some unrealistic expectations and knowledge about herself, and in so many ways, she looked at getting married as a way out of it because my mother constantly told her she could not live on her own and made her feel as though she was very dependent on her. And when my mother couldn't do that to me because she controlled the funds, it was like she was never going to help me. 3 times I was left homeless because she refused to help me. I was lucky enough to know how to get myself out of the situation. And I had gone to school and learned about psychology and mental health. And because of that, I was able to, while I was still in college, just tell her to shut up and not tell me what I can or can't do because she didn't know. And in a lot of ways, what she was doing was holding her children back so that she didn't have to be left alone. And the sad part was she was alone. And how they treated her in the latter part of her years, well, let me back up and tell you what happened to my grandmother. She had Alzheimer's. Plus, she really, for the last 15 years of her life, went from the bed to the chair and back to the bed, and she had caregivers from morning till night. And then my uncle was there in the evening. But her daughters would really, they kept her alive even though she was ready to go out, and she lived to be 92. But the reason was that they were basically abusing her in the way that she had abused them by keeping her alive and putting her in the hospital. Now she had had cancer of the throat, so when they gave her radiation, she lost the opportunity for saliva glands, and she would liquefy food, and then it would develop and it would collect in pockets, and she would stop eating, and then my aunts would stick her in the hospital and put feeding tubes down her and tie her hands down. And according to them, it was because they loved her so much that they were just keeping her alive. If they had really loved her, they would have let her go out in peace instead of doing that to her. Well, she lived to be 92. My mother lived to be 92. And really, the last few years of her life, she ended up getting macular degeneration and losing her eyesight. And then the last year of her life was really wheelchair bound because her legs were giving out. Even though she did a lot of walking and even though she was physically strong, that because she didn't understand certain things and she was so negative that yes, she ended up putting herself in a position where her children were there to take care of her. But because of what she did to me and because I was aware of her, I always told her, remember what you give, because that's what you're going to get back. And in the end, I was not there for her. And she did something to me that totally made me not want to be there for her. Because what she did to me was that she thought that since she couldn't control me, she could write me out of the will. Well, after that, she didn't talk to me for a couple of years because I stayed as far away from them as I possibly could. But in the end, they she was told that if she didn't change those things, that there could be a lawsuit against the estate because, and I would have done it too, because this wasn't money that she earned. This was money that my father earned and set up for us, knowing he had 2 children with disabilities. That at that time, it was assumed that if you were disabled, you couldn't work, you couldn't do anything. But and he wanted to make sure we were left financially secure and set up certain trust funds for us. Well, as you can see, that's someone who's very narcissistic, and And the problem is that really until recently in the last few years, we talk about narcissism, we talk about mental health issues, but back in the day, when my mother was taking my sister for therapy, they looked at her and said, "You look like you have some problems." And she goes, "Only if you could solve it for me can you help me." Well, no one can solve your problems for you, but they can teach you how to cope with them and how to deal with them and how not to let them control your life. And I hope you come back tomorrow and listen to a next segment of my short little videos and motivational talks.